Most fighters don't lose fights because they're not tough enough. Anyone who is brave enough to get smacked in the face and step in a ring has at least got a pair of balls on them. Most fighters will lose because their training doesn't really have any real structure. They'll show up to the gym, they'll do whatever the coach tells them to, they'll grind through some brutal conditioning circuit that leaves them sweaty and maybe throwing up, and sometimes they'll go for some runs and do some weights in the gym in their own time, and then they'll call it a day. And that effort is certainly real, and I don't think anyone questions that. Fighters are obviously some of the toughest bastards on the planet, but toughness without direction is just suffering for no real reason. You're spending energy and breaking yourself down, and you're not getting what you could be getting out of it. Structured strength and conditioning training will make you hit harder, last longer in every round, and ultimately win more fights, which is what we want. That is what happens when you stop training kind of randomly and you start training with a proper system. So most fighters' physical training comes in two kind of forms. You do whatever your coach throws at you in class. Usually that's some kind of high intensity interval training designed to just wreck you because maybe your coach is a bit of a sadist, and then you're probably doing your own thing on the side as well because you care and you want to get some extra training in so that you can perform better. Like you do some gym exercises, calisthenics, a few runs because you know that road work is important and you feel like you're working hard, and you are working hard. But hard work without structure, I hate to say it, it is just burning calories. Your training needs to be specific and directed towards the adaptations that you want to produce. And I understand you're a martial artist, you're not a strength athlete. Your priority absolutely should be your skill work, like your sparring, your technique, your drills and so on. And that is right. But a lot of fighters don't realize that properly managed strength and conditioning doesn't compete with your skill work. It supports it actually. It fills in the gaps that your sport itself doesn't cover. It'll make your skill work more effective because you've got a stronger, more powerful and better conditioned body to express that skill through. You can think of it like your martial art being the software and your body itself being the hardware. You can have the best software in the world, but if the hardware just can't run it properly, it doesn't matter. Strength and conditioning upgrades the hardware. I've just released a full combat sports strength and conditioning guide that goes extremely deep on all of this. Everything that I'm about to cover in this video, the guide covers in way more detail, with over 50 program templates, detailed exercise explanations, full conditioning protocols, the whole lot. If you want the complete system, I'm going to link that below. But this video is going to give you a really solid foundation to understand what you should be training, why, and how to get started. So what can you actually expect to gain when you start doing proper strength and conditioning training? First of all, you're going to hit harder because strength training builds the raw force behind your strikes, and then power training teaches your body to express that force quickly. Strength training is the foundation of all physical expression. A stronger and more explosive fighter is just going to be more dangerous. It's pretty straightforward. Second, you'll be able to last longer in each round. Proper conditioning develops your energy systems so that you can keep putting out a high degree of effort even deep into the later rounds of a fight, and then you can recover really fast in between exchanges as well. You probably know that feeling when you're deep into a round or deep into the fight and your arms are just getting so heavy, your shoulders are absolutely burning, you're feeling just sluggish and kind of numb. Good conditioning makes all of that happen much later or to a much lesser extent. You're also just going to be harder to break. Strength training makes your joints more stable, your connective tissue is going to be more resilient, your body will be more resistant to the constant wear and tear of getting beaten up in fight training because it is a very high impact kind of sport. Your body really takes a beating. Injury prevention is performance enhancement. You may have heard that saying before. So many of the guys that you will be fighting against are themselves going to be dealing with chronic like aches and pains, and they're going to be trying to avoid these little injuries that they've built up over the years and kind of ignored. So just staying healthy and injury free will give you a big advantage. And then fourth, your skill work will get better because when you're strong relative to your body weight, everything just takes less effort. You can maintain cleaner technique even when you're fatigued. You will waste less energy on every transition, every strike. Being strong is just better than being weak. That sounds obvious. I don't think that should really be argued, but some people still need to hear it. Alright, so there are three main physical capacities that matter for combat athletes and really any other athlete as well. Those are strength, power, and conditioning. And everything in your strength and conditioning basically falls into one of these three buckets. Strength is the ability to produce force, and it is the foundation that everything else is built upon. You're able to move around because your muscles contract and produce force. Strength is really important for power, for speed, conditioning, controlling your position, and preventing injuries. Without a base of strength, your power is going to be limited, your conditioning is going to be less efficient, and you'll be more vulnerable to injury. So for fighters, you might think that strength isn't that involved because you think that strength strength is like strongman and powerlifting. But when you're like driving through a takedown, when you're maintaining your own posture when someone is trying to break that, when you're resisting your opponent's attempts to move you, and even generating the force behind your strikes, that is all strength. And we train strength through heavy resistance exercise. So compound movements like squats, deadlifts, pull-ups, and presses, and we do them for lower rep ranges with heavier weights, generally somewhere around 3 to 6 reps in each set using pretty heavy loads. And the goal is not to get a pump or chase the burn like a bodybuilder. The goal is to teach your body to produce more force. And again, I want to make it clear, we're not trying to turn you into a powerlifter. You don't need to deadlift like 300 kilos. You need to be strong enough for your sport and strong enough that your strength becomes an advantage for you rather than a limitation. And then once you're strong enough, you can shift your focus more to like power, conditioning, and your skills. There's definitely a point of diminishing returns, and chasing lift numbers beyond that point starts to create trade-offs that actually hurt your performance, like slower recovery, potentially worse mobility, less time for skill work if you're putting too much time into strength. So you got to find the sweet spot. There is such a thing as being too big and strong in martial arts, but really most people will never reach that point. Everyone benefits from proper strength training. You're rarely going to think, damn, I wish I was weaker, and then that would have made winning this fight easier. Strength is an advantage. Power is force times velocity. It is the ability to generate a lot of force quickly, to express that force with speed. So like strikes, throws, takedowns, sprawling and scrambling. Most things in a fight will happen pretty fast, and you have to be able to react and make decisions and move and apply force quickly before your opponent has a chance to respond. Strength training alone won't give you power. A lot of people think that strength will just make you slower. That is only if you do it wrong. A slow grinding squat definitely is pure strength, of course. You're producing a lot of force but at a very low speed. And power training takes that strength base that you've built and it teaches you to express it explosively. So you're adding speed into the equation. You train power through things like jumps and sprints, medicine ball throws and slams, some explosive barbell work. And power is where a lot of fighters really mess up. They turn their power training into conditioning, which is such an easy mistake to make. They'll do like jumps for 60 seconds straight, or they'll do med ball slams over and over until they're like totally gassed out. And that is not power training. That is more like sloppy conditioning. Power training has to be low volume, absolute maximum effort with lots of rest in between sets. Your nervous system really needs to be fresh and unfatigued to produce the massive motor commands that are required for explosive movement. If you're feeling slow or sluggish during your power training, then you're probably no longer training power and you're drifting into conditioning territory. You should think of every single rep like a knockout punch, like maximum intent, really explosive focus, full recovery between sets as well. Usually there's about 3 to 5 reps in each set, somewhere around 2 to 5 sets total, about 1 or 2 minutes rest in between each set. But really you just got to be fully recovered before you go into the next set. Each power session shouldn't be taking more than like 15 minutes, and I like to place them at the start of your strength workout. So after the warm-up, you do your power and then you move into your strength work. Unless you're doing contrast training, which I get into in much more detail in the guide. Now for conditioning. I love conditioning personally. A lot of people find it very boring, but I think it's a really cool, kind of underrated part of training. And this is the one that many fighters think that they understand, but most of them are actually getting it wrong. Conditioning is not just cardio, although obviously that is a huge part of it. It's not just getting your heart rate up or being able to run a good 5K. For fighters, conditioning means training your body to produce and recover energy more efficiently so that you can keep performing in the fight for longer, you can recover way faster, and then you can display your skills even when you're fatigued. Your body has got 3 energy systems and all 3 of them need to be trained. Most fighters, unfortunately, only really focus on 1 or 2 of them and then ignore the third, or they don't really know that it even exists. The first is the aerobic system, and this is your long duration, low to moderate intensity energy system. It's fueled by oxygen and it powers everything from like zone 2 cardio, just jogging, up to your recovery in between rounds and even in between like exchanges within a round. The aerobic system is the foundation of your conditioning. Without a strong aerobic base, everything else just falls apart. You're going to gas out early, your heart rate is going to stay elevated in between rounds, so you're not recovering properly. Your power is really going to drop off by round 2 or 3, and you're going to just feel wrecked after every training session. A strong aerobic base also powers the recovery of your other energy systems. So your phosphocreatine stores, for example, are replenished aerobically. You train the aerobic system with low intensity, steady state work like jogging, cycling, rowing, incline walking, somewhere around 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. Easy enough that you can hold a conversation, and the sessions should last for like 30 to 60 minutes. Even even longer if you can. The more kind of volume you can do with aerobic work, the better. You'll probably feel like this doesn't feel hard enough, and that is exactly the point. You can think of it like building your gas tank, not testing it. You can test it in the fight, but for now, most of your conditioning should be pretty low intensity aerobic stuff. Running and cycling and all of that is really good. You can also include more fight specific aerobic work, like some very light shadow boxing, jump rope, or low intensity bag work circuits. If you can keep that at a low enough intensity, keep your heart rate down and sustain that for a good 20 plus minutes. The second energy system is the anaerobic alactic system, also called the phosphocreatine system. And this is what fuels your highest intensity efforts for about 0 to 10 seconds. So really explosive, really short duration stuff, like a quick flurry on the pads or a takedown shot, short violent bursts of explosiveness. And this is the system that can give you that snappiness and speed. And you train the alactic system with very short all-out efforts and long rest periods. So like 5 to 10 seconds of maximum effort and then maybe 2, 3 or even more minutes of complete rest. Ideally you recover fully in between rounds, but there is a place for incomplete recovery as well if you're training alactic capacity. I get into that more in the guide, of course. You repeat each of these rounds 4 to 8 times. And some good exercises for this kind of training are things like assault bike sprints, sled pushes, hill sprints, striking the bag as hard as you can for, 10 seconds, like a really high intensity combo. All of these are really good options. The third system is the anaerobic lactic system, also called the glycolytic system. And this is the one that produces that really brutal muscle burn and making you sweat and just feel miserable. And this is the system that dominates in efforts that last about 20 to 90 seconds at high intensity. In fighting, this is the system that is going to power kind of long struggles, long exchanges with your opponent and maintaining your output through the middle and the later parts of the round. This is also the kind of training that you'll see in a lot of fight classes, like when they get you doing some conditioning work, some high intensity interval training, it'll be this kind of thing with not much rest, quite long rounds, 30 seconds, a minute of really high output, like brutal effort. And that is how you train the lactic system. So longer intervals, shorter rest, 30 to 60 seconds of hard effort, 30 to 60 seconds of rest for something like 6 to 10 rounds. You can do this with exercises like bag intervals, pad work, do it on the assault bike again, that's such a good tool, sled pushes, rowing, even running. I said this is what you get in most fight classes, and that means that this tends to be overdone in many cases. It feels really productive because you're training so hard, but it's very easy to overdo. If you're doing this too much, you're probably going to degrade your skill work because you're always fatigued. It can make you slower because you're not getting in enough direct power work and alactic work, and it can really interfere with your strength and power development because it is like so fatiguing. It's going to bleed into the next day. Lactic training is a very powerful tool, but it needs to be used strategically. You're probably going to be doing some lactic training within your fight classes themselves, like year round, but on top of that, you're probably not going to need a whole lot of extra lactic training unless you're at a certain point in your fight prep. So the overarching principles that I want you to keep in mind and guide basically all of your strength and conditioning training. First, you want to train to fight better, not just to get tired. Every exercise and every session you do should have a clear purpose and some kind of carryover to the fight. If you can't explain how something is helping you in a fight, then it probably shouldn't be in your program, or you just need to educate yourself a bit better about why that specific thing is in there. Second, make sure you're progressing fairly slowly and sustainably. It's very easy to go too hard for too long and then break down. The best results will come from consistent sub-maximal work and consistent good sessions, not like one-off heroic sessions where you just destroy yourself every couple of weeks. If you train at like 80% for years, you're going to outperform anyone who tries to go at 100% and then just burns out within weeks. Thirdly, everything must serve the skill of fighting. Your strength and conditioning should never interfere with your sparring or drills as much as possible. You shouldn't be getting super sore from your strength and conditioning. It should just fill in what your sport doesn't already provide. If the classes themselves are quite hard, they are quite fatiguing, you're probably going to need a smaller dose of strength and conditioning just to keep that kind of balance of stress and fatigue appropriate, rather than trying to add so much on top of your schedule what you've already got, and then it just ends up being too much and you break down. And lastly, when you're in doubt, it's probably a good idea to do a bit less rather than more. And I know this is a very hard rule for fighters to follow. You're used to pushing yourself to the limit and feeling like any session that didn't leave you totally destroyed was like a waste of time and unproductive, but that is not the case at all. Strength and conditioning conditioning is a tool to enhance your performance. It is not a test of your mental toughness. You want to show up to the fight in top shape. That is the goal. We don't really care about how hard, how tough you are in your training sessions. We care about performing on the day, and I want you to keep that in mind. So let's talk about some actual exercises. So what exercises should you be doing? For strength, there are 5 main movement patterns that I think every fighter should be doing regularly. Those are the squat, hinge, push, pull, and carry. For the squat, I'm a big fan of front squats for fighters. They teach you to stay upright, they build really good posture, you'll build a strong upper back and core. The weight is in front of you like it would be in a fight and in most other real life situations rather than on your back. Of course, they build really strong legs. Other good squat variations are high bar back squats. I wouldn't really suggest low bar because we are not training for powerlifting here. Zercher squats are also great, of course, and then Bulgarian split squats as well for the single leg variation. For the hinge pattern, I think trap bar deadlifts are really good. They're arguably the best mix of power, posture, and safety. Romanian deadlifts are fantastic for building your glutes and hamstrings in terms of like hypertrophy, and you could maybe do kettlebell swings, which kind of bridge the gap between strength and power. For pushing, I really like dips for pressing strength if your shoulders can handle them. Ring push-ups, I think, are very underrated. Same with ring dips. I find those to be much easier on the shoulders because of the freedom of movement. And the landmine press in a half kneeling position or a kind of rotational landmine press. You'll see lots of boxers doing this in the gym. Of course, the basic presses like bench press and overhead press will also work very well and build brute strength and size. They're just not quite so specific to fighting, I guess. For the pulls, pull-ups are basically the central one, ideally weighted as you get stronger. All kinds of grip variations like overhand, underhand, neutral grip, narrow, medium, wide grip, then chest supported rows to train your upper back without fatiguing your lower back. But bent over barbell rows certainly do have their place, especially if you can find a slot in your program where the lower back fatigue isn't going to interfere with anything else. And then things like face pulls for shoulder health and posture. And lastly, carries. This is the category that a lot of guys probably overlook. Front sandbag carries are phenomenal. They will build your upper back strength and endurance, your core control, and your squeezing strength. It's like you're holding someone's body in front of you. So for sports like wrestling, where you are using your strength to manipulate your opponent's body more than in other sports, this kind of movement, this kind of carry is really useful. And then things like farmers carries will build grip and good posture and kind of core stability. I recommend you find somewhere to do a carry at least one time a week. Those are the strength exercises. Let's move on to the power ones. You want a mix of like upper body, lower body, and rotational power. For the lower body, basic stuff like broad jumps for horizontal force, box jumps or vertical jumps for vertical power, and then lateral bounds for like direction changes. For the upper body, plyometric push-ups are really good for explosive pushing strength, and then medicine ball chest passes as well. And for rotational medicine ball throws against the wall is a very nice fight-specific kind of movement pattern where you're producing rotational power from the hips like you would in a punch. You should do your power exercises at the start of each lifting session after your warm-up while you are still fresh. You need to be fresh and unfatigued to train power. Do 2 or 3 of these exercises, 3 to 5 reps in each set, somewhere like 2 to 5 sets for each movement, and resting fully in between sets. And that is your power workout at the start of a strength workout. For conditioning exercises, keep it fairly simple. Your aerobic base is built mostly with like steady state lower intensity work like jogging, cycling, or incline walking at a conversational pace for about 30 to 60 minutes and longer if you can. You can also use shadow boxing or jump rope or striking a bag at a very low intensity that you can keep up for 20 minutes or more. Your alactic system is trained with very short explosive bursts, like 5 to 10 seconds of max effort, absolutely emptying the tank and then resting fully and repeating. And for that, the best exercises are things like striking a bag at max effort for a few seconds, doing assault bike sprints and hill sprints. And then your lactic system is trained with longer intervals and shorter rest times, but this is used a bit more strategically because it's so fatiguing, so you're not going to be doing this in like every session for sure. And the exercises you use for lactic training can be pretty similar to the alactic ones, like striking, assault bike sprints, rowing, and running. For most people who are training martial arts a couple times a week and want to add strength and conditioning around that, the aerobic base building is where you should spend most of your conditioning time, with some like alactic work sprinkled in, because the martial arts classes themselves will often cover a lot of the high intensity intervals that you might normally do in a conditioning session. So basically, like the more hard conditioning you're doing within the martial arts classes themselves, the less you probably need to do outside of those classes. So those are the exercises you should be doing. But before I give you a program to follow, there is something important that you you need to do, and most guys overlook. You need to figure out what your weaknesses actually are, because that is where most of your attention should be going. A lot of guys don't really know what they are worst at. Like, they just train not specifically to expose any of their weaknesses, so they just default to training kind of what they're already good at because that feels good, it feels productive. If you've got a decent aerobic base, then you probably enjoy going for runs because the runs feel fairly easy and your performance tells you that you're doing well. And if your bench press is strong, you're going to keep bench pressing and doing strength work because you like seeing your numbers go up. That's very satisfying to you. And the whole time you might be ignoring your actual weak link, which is sitting there like untrained and dragging your fight performance down. So just to give you my own example, I have done some long endurance training for a few years. My endurance is pretty good and my resting heart rate is about 45 beats per minute or so. But my top end sprint speed and my explosive power is not great because I just haven't put much emphasis into training that over the last few years. If I was programming for myself right now with a fight in mind, I would be biasing towards explosive movements and short alactic kind of sprints, not a whole lot of steady state running, because I've already kind of built that base and that is not where I would get the most return on my time investment. So have a think for yourself. Where are you actually weakest? Do you hit really hard for one round and then gas out in the second round? Then you probably need more aerobic base work and lactic capacity. If you're the guy who can grind out for 10 rounds but doesn't really have much finishing power, can't end exchanges, then you probably need some more strength and power work, alactic intervals, max effort stuff, because your long duration endurance seems to be fine. If you're strong in the gym but then you like gas out the moment a real fight starts, then you probably need more conditioning of all types, and you might be carrying more muscle than your body can really support right now, because bigger muscles need more oxygen. If you've got the build of a bodybuilder, your cardio has to be even better just to keep up. You really can't neglect your cardio. So you have to be honest with yourself. The thing that you're worst at is usually the thing that you have been avoiding, and it's also the thing that you should do to get the biggest returns in terms of your overall performance, if you actually get that thing that you've been neglecting up to scratch. But the problem with trying to develop multiple aspects of physicality at once is that your body can only really make massive adaptations in one or two areas at once. If you try to develop your max strength, your top speed, aerobic capacity and lactic capacity and your power all to the absolute max in the same training block, you're not going to get very far in any of them. You have to prioritize just a couple of them and then put the others in maintenance on the back burner. And this is called block periodization. You spend a block of a certain number of weeks, in our case I would say about 4 to 6 weeks, emphasizing one or two specific qualities, like maybe you really emphasize power, or you're doing a strength block because you've noticed that your strength is a weakness. You spend a block focusing on that, and the other qualities just get maintained at a lower volume in the background. You don't lose them, you don't stop training them entirely, you just maintain them. And then once you've completed that block, you switch the emphasis in the next block. And then over the course of a year, you have really focused on every quality individually. It's got its own dedicated block, and you've moved all of your physical capacities forward, strength, power, and conditioning. All of your weaknesses have hopefully been addressed, and you've done this by focusing on each of those rather than spreading yourself thin, trying to do it all at the same time. So the program I'm about to give you is a very generic, like balanced, broad starting point. It is a good foundation if you don't know where you stand right now, but once you've identified your weak link, you should start to target that. So like add an extra session for the quality that you're weakest in. So I promised you a nice simple program, so here it is. This is designed for someone who is training fight classes 2 days a week and wants to add some structured strength and conditioning around those fight classes. So those 2 fight class days are your skill and maybe your like sparring days. Make sure you're protecting those, because those really are your priority. If you're trying to get better at fighting, those are like the non-negotiables. And then on top of that, you have 2 days of lifting per week. Each lifting session starts with 2 or 3 power exercises and then moves into somewhere around 4 or 5 strength exercises, and then generally finishes with 20 to 30 minutes of low intensity steady state conditioning if you have time for that. So you do power first while you're fresh, strength in the middle, and then aerobic work at the end when it won't interfere with anything. So here's what a week of training could look like. Monday, your fight class. You don't have any other sessions on that day, just so you can really focus on being fresh for that fight class and that skill training. On Tuesday, you do some lifting, so you warm up and then do your power work like broad jumps and medicine ball rotational throws, and then move on to some strength exercises like trap bar deadlifts for quite heavy weight, dips, chest supported rows, and then maybe a suitcase carry. That covers your lower body, your pushing, your pulling, and some carries. And then you finish with like 25 minutes of easy cycling or jogging in zone 2. Wednesday, you've just had quite a hard couple couple of days before that. So this is going to be a rest day or like a light active recovery day if you want. And you go back into another fight class on Thursday, followed by another lifting session with some different exercises this time. So different power exercises, making sure we're covering all our bases throughout the week, and different strength exercises. So a squat instead of a hinge, weighted pull-ups instead of rows, and landmine press instead of dips, and then a front sandbag carry, which, like I said, I think is one of the most useful carries for fighters. And then again, ending the session with some easy zone 2 cardio. And on Saturday, you can add an extra conditioning session. So this could be a dedicated alactic session, like 6 rounds of 5-second max effort assault bike sprints with a good long 90 seconds of rest between those. Or you could do a longer aerobic session if that's the thing that you think you should be working on, like 45 to 90 minutes, really as long as you can manage. And you could alternate between those two week to week, or you could identify your weakness and just focus on targeting that. Like, do you need a bigger aerobic base, or do you need more repeatable explosive power? And then Sunday is a full rest day. So that's the program: 2 fight days, 2 lifting days, some extra conditioning. Remember, you'll probably be doing conditioning within your fight classes. You're doing like 5 or 6 total training days a week. I always try to leave 1 full day of rest if that is possible. And of course, this is very generic. You can customize this. You can drop sessions, you can add sessions in, change exercises, all based on your personal needs. So like if you can add in an extra conditioning session during the week, then that is great, but you don't need to force that. You should adjust your schedule gradually, be consistent, and pay attention to how your body is responding, like your recovery and your performance over time. For your progression, you should aim to slowly increase the weight on your strength lifts over time. Add a small amount of weight every week or two, or even less often. You could go for a target RPE range. Say you want to hit like RPE 8 on your deadlifts on a certain day, or you could use a certain percentage of your 1 rep max on each week and like increase that over maybe 4 weeks and then drop it back down in a kind of periodization of your strength work. I go into specifics like all of this stuff in the Combat Sports Strength and Conditioning Guide itself. For power exercises, you should focus on improving the quality and speed of your reps rather than adding load. We don't want to turn it into conditioning or into strength training. We want it to be quick and snappy and high quality. And for conditioning, track your heart rate during your zone 2 sessions and try to cover more distance at the same heart rate over time, and that shows you you're getting fitter. So for example, if you could do 3 kilometers in like 22 minutes previously at 140 beats per minute, and then a few months later 3 kilometers takes you like 20 minutes at the same heart rate, that shows you you're moving faster while staying at the same heart rate, so you're getting fitter. And one last note before we wrap up: you can't out-train your recovery. Unfortunately, I've learned this the hard way before several times. If you are training 2 or more fight classes a week and you're lifting like 2 or 3 times a week and doing extra conditioning on top of that, that is quite a big workload. You need to really make sure you're sleeping well, ideally like 8 to 9 hours, but at least like 7 hours if that's all you have time for. You need to eat quite a lot as well, especially protein and carbs to fuel your workouts and your recovery. Make sure you're able to hit your weight class target, obviously, but don't try to do all of this huge workload in a big chronic caloric deficit. Training is so much more productive when you have got plenty of energy and plenty of resources to put into it, and that comes from enough calories, enough raw materials, ideally a caloric surplus, really. Your recovery isn't something that's optional. It is part of the program. It's something that you should be actively thinking about just as much as your training, really. So the program that I've given you will serve a lot of people really well, but if you want to go deeper, if you want full periodized training blocks, templates for every phase from strength, GPP, power, fight camp itself, detailed exercise libraries with like coaching cues, conditioning protocols for every energy system, and guidance on how to tailor everything to your martial art, I've just released my Combat Sports Strength and Conditioning Guide, which is the most detailed resource that I have ever made. The goal is basically to make you an expert in martial arts strength and conditioning so that you can coach yourself. There are hundreds of pages of programming, templates, exercise breakdowns, all designed specifically for combat athletes that will be linked in the description. So to recap everything, get your strength base in, build your power on top of that, develop all 3 energy systems, not just the one that you typically do in your fight classes, train with a structure, not randomly, prioritize your weak links, respect your recovery, and make sure that everything you're doing in the gym is actually making you better in the ring, on the mat, or in the cage. Stop training hard just for the sake of being tough and start training hard within a smart system. That is how you become the most dangerous fighter you possibly can. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.